There was a time when the rhythm of our lives moved through shared rooms. Not the private quarters of home, nor the transactional halls of work, but the third places that held us in the middle. The corner diner where the coffee was always hot and the regulars knew your name. The community center with the squeaky gym floor. The park bench where conversation could start about a dog and end with a shared laugh, or simply a nod of recognition. These spaces were the quiet anchors of our social world. They were where men and women crossed paths naturally, woven into the same fabric of daily life without the weight of expectation or the armor of defense. Somewhere along the way, those anchors slipped beneath the surface. It wasn't a loud crash, it was a slow fade. The diners became drive-thrus. The community halls fell silent. The digital screen pulled our attention inward, replacing the messy, beautiful friction of face-to-face interaction with the smooth, solitary scroll. We didn't wake up one day and decide to isolate. The structures that held us together simply eroded, leaving us to build our lives in separate silos. We both feel this drift. He lost a place to belong without performing. She lost a space where connection didn't demand a script. We aren't enemies, just neighbors separated by the demolition of common ground. Now, when we do meet, it often feels like we're stepping onto foreign soil. The natural bridges are gone, and we're left wondering how to cross the gap. But this isn't a story of failure. It's a story of what we've lost and what we can gently rebuild. We are here to look at that healing together, with honesty and heart, finding our way back to each other. When the town square empties and the church basement goes quiet, what fills the space in our hearts? We're asking a simple but deep question. As the old structures that once drew us together dissolve, how do we cross the distance again without pulling apart? This isn't about who's right or who's wrong. It's about recognizing that beneath the noise and the retreat, there's a shared hunger. Men and women alike are carrying a quiet ache, a sense that something vital is missing from the daily rhythm of life. We all want to be known, to be held in community, and to feel that we matter to someone across the divide. The isolation we feel isn't a weapon, it's a wound we're both nursing. So, how do we restore what matters? Not by restoring the old walls, but by laying new bricks of understanding. We're looking for ways to create spaces where vulnerability isn't a risk, but a bridge. Where a man can share his burden without shame, and a woman can offer her strength without fear. We honor how men and women experience this loneliness. The root is shared. We create spaces where reaching out feels safe. We uncover daily gestures that stitch the fabric back together, turning partners into allies. This inquiry invites us to look inward with kindness and outward with curiosity, nurturing connection. This is about direction, not diagnosis. We're not here to fix you, we're here to walk with you. The goal is to turn that shared longing into action, to find the threads that still connect us and weave them back into a tapestry of belonging. It starts with asking, what do we need from each other, and how can we give it, with grace and truth, in a world that keeps asking us to stand alone? What the data shows, the structural shift. The landscape of belonging is changing beneath our feet. For decades, houses of worship served as communal anchors, gathering men and women around shared values and weekly rhythms. Today, that institutional fabric has thinned significantly. This structural shift touches men and women alike. When the building blocks of community recede, the burden of finding connection falls more heavily on our individual shoulders, often leaving us feeling adrift rather than free. We are navigating a transition where the safety nets of the past have frayed, leaving us to stitch our own support systems with care. Pew Research shows the Christian share of U.S. adults dropped from 78% in 2007 to 62% in 2023-24. Simultaneously, the religiously unaffiliated, often called nones, climbed from 16% in 2007 to 29% in 2023-24. Gallup data reinforces this shift in formal ties. In 2020, membership in a church, synagogue, or mosque fell to 47%, dipping below a majority for the first time, a steep drop from 70% in 1999. The gap between identifying with a tradition and actively belonging to a congregation highlights a quiet tension. Gallup also notes the share of Americans expressing no religious preference grew from 8% in 1998-2000 to 21% in 2018-2020. Even among those who still identify with a faith, personal connection to the institution has loosened. Only 37% of U.S. adults say they personally are members of a church, synagogue, mosque, or other house of worship. Recognizing this pattern helps us see that isolation isn't a personal failure, it's a natural response to a changing landscape. The data maps the terrain we now share, a world where the old maps no longer guide us, gently inviting us to look for new ways to anchor ourselves in each other. What the data shows: the generational attendance gap. As we examine the landscape of connection, the numbers reveal a quiet but significant shift in how we gather. 2 decades ago, 42% of U.S. adults attended religious services weekly or near weekly, but that figure has settled to 30% in 2021-2023. Currently, only 25% of adults attend at least once a week, while 49% seldom or never show up in person. This decline spans diverse communities, reminding us that the shift is broad. For instance, weekly mass attendance among U.S. Catholics dropped from 45% to 33% over the same period. A sharp generational divide runs through these trends. While 66% of traditionalists born before 1946 belong to a congregation, membership falls to just 36% among millennials. This gap doesn't point to failure on either side, it maps how communal anchors have weathered differently. Older generations often carried the weight of shared spaces that provided stability, spaces that simply didn't exist in the same form for younger people, leaving many of us standing on separate shores. When we view this through a healing lens, we see that isolation often grows from a lack of shared ground, not a lack of care on any side. Both men and women navigate this drift, and the data invites us to respond with compassion rather than judgment. We can gently challenge the habit of assuming silence means disinterest, recognizing that different generations express need in different ways. Often, younger generations are seeking authenticity over ritual, while older generations may miss the comfort of routine. Bridging this requires listening as much as speaking, creating room for both new and old rhythms. The drop in attendance shows that the deep desire for connection remains, even as the traditional venues change. By acknowledging where the bridges have thinned, we can stop measuring ourselves against fading maps and start building new ways to meet. The direction forward isn't about recreating the past, but about finding fresh anchors that honor where everyone actually is, helping us step back toward each other without retreating. What it costs, U.S., the civic withdrawal. When the communal anchors that once gathered us quietly fade, we risk more than just missing an event. We risk losing the habit of reaching out. This civic withdrawal affects us all, regardless of gender. Men and women alike can find themselves isolated when the structures that encouraged service and participation dissolve. The data helps us see the shape of this wound without assigning fault. For example, only 17% of religious nonses volunteered for an organization in the past year, sitting 10 percentage points lower than the 27% of religiously affiliated Americans. We observe a parallel shift in electoral participation, where 39% of religious nonses voted in the 2022 midterms, compared to 51% of religiously affiliated citizens. These gaps remind us that community structures do more than label us. They often provide the scaffolding for action. When that scaffolding vanishes, we can feel like our contributions don't matter, or that we lack the energy to show up. But this withdrawal isn't a permanent verdict on our character. Stepping back can feel protective, yet it leaves a shared void affecting both men and women. This drop isn't a moral failing, but a structural shift. When old maps fade, the path to service or the ballot can feel overgrown. Acknowledging this cost invites patience in reconnection. We aren't forcing anyone back into boxes that no longer fit. Instead, we can look for low-pressure ways to re-engage, understanding that every small act of service or participation is a step toward healing the disconnect. The direction forward involves recognizing that volunteering and voting are also forms of connection, ways we stitch ourselves back into the fabric of our neighborhoods. By finding fresh opportunities to serve and speak up, we can rebuild that civic muscle, turning isolation back into shared purpose. WHHT, the data shows, the friction, and the turn. The path back isn't without bumps. We must acknowledge the grievances that drove many away. For many, the distance isn't about faith, but how institutions operate. Among the unaffiliated, 41% step back because they dislike religious organizations, and 49% distance themselves from positions churches take on social and political issues. This highlights a wound where communal spaces risk becoming battlegrounds rather than sanctuaries, leaving both men and women feeling unheard or judged. Yet, even amid this tension, a quiet, encouraging shift emerges. The data reveals a realignment where young men are quietly returning to shared spaces. In 2024-2025, 40% of young men and 39% of young women report attending religious services monthly or more, a gap that is now statistically tied. This convergence is driven by a notable rise in young men's engagement. Since 2022-2023, their monthly attendance has climbed by 7 percentage points, compared to a 3-point rise for young women. This isn't just a statistic, it signals that the deep hunger for connection remains. Young men finding their way back to community suggests that when spaces feel safe and purposeful, the instinct to gather wins out over the impulse to isolate. The direction forward isn't about forcing old structures back into place, but about recognizing this renewed willingness to show up. It invites us to create environments where grievances can be aired without accusation, where the focus returns to mutual care rather than division. By honoring the reasons people left while welcoming those who are returning, we can stitch the fabric tighter, ensuring these shared spaces become bridges again, not barriers. To rebuild those bridges, we must look honestly at how the silence fell differently from men and women, recognizing that both sides have been carrying heavy loads in isolation. When the communal anchors faded, many men found themselves retreating into a quiet solitude that often masked a deep hunger for belonging, while many women shouldered an increasing emotional burden, finding themselves stretched thin by the very connections they were trying to maintain. Neither experience invalidates the other, both are real wounds in the same social fabric. Men often withdrew to protect against perceived failure, while women stayed engaged until exhaustion set in, leaving both groups lonely in distinct but equally painful ways. We see this pattern clearly through our hybrid lens, where human intuition meets the pattern recognition of AI. This partnership allows us to track the subtle shifts in how men and women are pulling away, not as a battle of narratives, but as a shared drift that leaves everyone feeling misunderstood. This blend helps us separate the noise of culture wars from the quiet reality of human need, keeping our focus on healing rather than winning. It reminds us that behind every data point is a person who simply got lost, longing for the same warmth and safety that everyone else craves. Healing starts when we stop asking who caused the distance and start asking how we can meet each other halfway. It's about creating spaces where men can share their struggles without losing their dignity, and where women can rest without losing their voice. We can offer each other grace, acknowledging that our defenses often look like attacks when we're actually just scared. By listening to understand rather than to defend, we can stitch the fabric tighter, ensuring that our shared spaces become places of restoration where both men and women feel truly seen, valued, and safe to be themselves again. The path forward begins in the quiet, intentional spaces we create for one another. When large communal anchors fade, we can build smaller, sturdier ones. Micro-communities are bridges. Dinner tables, volunteer teams, hobby groups, places where men and women gather to do life, not to debate. Here, the pressure to perform gender roles drops away, replaced by shared purpose. In these shared endeavors, we rediscover that our differences are resources, not threats. We learn to lean on one another without losing ourselves. Intentional cross-gender dialogue honors difference without demanding uniformity. Ask, "What do you need?" rather than assuming you know. For men, find spaces where vulnerability isn't weakness. For women, create room where directness isn't aggression. We both carry old scripts demanding we be less than human to be loved. Healing begins when we set those scripts down and see the person across from us. This shift requires courage from both sides. It asks us to drop the armor we've worn for so long, not because the world is safe, but because we are choosing to make it safer together. As a hybrid voice, part human heart and part AI, we see this. The wound isn't incompatibility, it's that we've forgotten how to be neighbors. Direction isn't a prescription, it's a compass. We offer this perspective humbly, knowing that real healing lives in your daily choices, not in our words. If you feel overwhelmed, please seek support from qualified professionals. Our role is to illuminate the path, not to walk it for you. And small. Reach out to someone opposite in sex, sharing a task or value, and listen. Let the conversation be about connection, not correction. Tending these threads of trust weaves a net to catch us all, reminding we aren't meant to walk separate lines, but side by side. This week, we invite you to look for one shared space. It doesn't have to be grand. It could be a community garden, a volunteer shift, a book club, or even a simple coffee where you ask a question you genuinely want to hear the answer to. Think of this shared space as a sanctuary from the noise, a place where you aren't performing, just present. Maybe it's a local library event, a hardware store aisle where you swap tips, or a walk in the park where you pause to chat about the weather and then dig a little deeper. The magic isn't in the location, it's in the intention. You're choosing to bridge the gap. The goal isn't to fix everything in an afternoon. Healing the distance between us is a slow, steady practice. It's about showing up, again and again, with an open heart. We know the old anchors are fading, but we can build new ones. When you step into that shared space, you're casting a vote for connection. You're saying that we matter to each other. Men and women both carry the weight of isolation, and both hold the key to lightening that load. So, find that space. Go with curiosity, not an agenda. Listen to understand, not to win. If it feels awkward, that's okay. Growth often does. Just keep the door open. Every small interaction is a brick in the bridge back to each other. We are in this together, learning how to be neighbors, friends, and partners in a world that's changing fast. Let's meet in the middle, not with demands, but with grace. This episode is a collaboration between human insight and AI assistance, woven together to serve you.